Hi and welcome to another one of the Tech Geeks videos. This is a how-to. This is a how to set up and use Unifi Talk. There's been a lot of conversations around how do I get this to work? What's the difference between Unifi Talk as a service and Unifi Talk as the product range? And I just thought it'd be good to just put this video together. I'm going to give you a couple of examples of how to actually get this physically working. I'm going to do one with Twilio, which is a little bit more of a difficult setup, and I'm going to use one with an Australian provider called FactorTel, which will be probably much more like what most people will have in this way of going forward. So I hope you find this video useful. Please do look in the chapters. I'm going to cover quite a lot in here, and those chapters will help you find the relevant information that you are after. So let's just jump in and get going. What I really wanted to just start with is a little bit of a coverage of how VoIP works. Now, there are lots of different ways that VoIP can work and will work. This is probably some of the common ways of looking at it. Some of you are probably way more in-depth understanding than I do, but I just want to show you the basics so you understand what's happening. I'm just going to quickly cover Unifi Talk and Unifi Talk as a service. So we have Unifi Talk as the product range. So that's the actual physical hardware. The phones that we have, probably like this one here. This is the G3 Touch Pro, which we'll have a look at in a little bit and set up. We're going to set this up also on a G2. That's how we're going to do a lot of the settings. There are a few feature changes in the G3, but if I can make it work on the G2, I can make it work on the G3. So we've got Unifi Talk as a set of products, and then we have Unifi Talk as a service. Unifi Talk as a service is actually Ubiquiti's own VoIP provision. My understanding, it's actually got Twilio as the background provider to it. I think it's available in the UK, maybe Canada and the US, and maybe now Europe as well. But you'd basically subscribe to that service, and Ubiquiti will provide you with your phone numbers. Ubiquiti will do all your billing for your calls and everything else. So you're buying into Ubiquiti being your VoIP provider. We're going to actually be covering using Unifi Talk hardware and what's called a third-party provider, or a number of third-party providers, which I'm going to do in this instance. And that means we don't have to use Ubiquiti's service. We can plug this into whatever we've already got. And in some instances, you'll be able to get this working if maybe you have a broadband connection and it comes with a VoIP username and password to be able to have a VoIP phone, a VoIP service. Certainly here, I'm based in Australia. Maybe we've got NBN and you've got VoIP as part of that. Then you can use this way of doing it to make it work in most instances. Now, the key to all of this is you will need a Ubiquiti device that supports Unifi Talk. So we normally call that a Unifi OS console. So we've got things like the UCG-Max, the UDM Pro, the Dream Wall, we've got the UDM SE, the UDM Pro Max, the UCG Fiber. So anything that supports multiple of the provisions. I think UDR7 and the original UDR as well. But it won't work on something like the UCG Ultra or the EFG. Those just run Unifi Network. But we'll cover out where you'll see those little bits in a moment. But what I really wanted to now just do is just set the scene. Now, we've talked about the Unifi Talk hardware and Ubiquiti's service called Unifi Talk as well, just to confuse things. But I want to talk about how we make this work with a third-party provider. So this info diagram here I've just created. Let's just walk this through, just so we get an idea of the concept of what's going on. There are a few networking things maybe here to talk about, but in probably most of the instances, we are going to use a trunk that is going to be registered. So I've just given you an idea with this arrow, the direction it goes. Let's liken this to your push notifications that we're used to getting on a mobile phone. They're probably a little bit elusive in the way that we understand it. When we use the word push, it sounds like the provider finds our phone where it is and sends a message to our phone. What we don't actually realize is that your phone is regularly checking in to see if there are any messages and picking them up and alerting you to them. So it's not about your provider knowing the IP address of your phone, where it is in the world, or those are relevant. Actually, your phone is the one that is saying, hey, have you got a message for me? Hey, you've got a message for me. And that's really the two ways that VoIP works. So in most instances, VoIP is what we call a pull technology. So if we follow this arrow here, it starts at this. So let's follow it from here. We've got a Unifi Talk phone that requests to make an outbound connection or phone a normal phone number, which obviously gets passed to our OS console. Our OS console then has what's called a trunk, a registered outbound trunk that's connected from the OS console to the VoIP provider. We don't have to have a communication coming back this way because the packet of information starts inside this network. And because it started in here, it's a bit like web browsing, if you like. You don't have to have an inbound firewall rule for web browsing to work. So in most instances, if you have a registered trunk, and we'll show you how that sets up in a little bit, then the request is going to be made by your OS console from your VoIP provider. That means in here we can have what's called double NAT. So you could be on a 3G provider where you don't get a static IP address or even a routable IP address from the outside world, or you could be on Starlink, for instance. So if we have a provider that gives you a registered trunk or the option to register the trunk, then the connection is a pull. So even a inbound telephone call that starts somewhere over here that is passed to our VoIP provider, actually, in fact, our OS console is regularly checking in to say, hello, have you got a call for me? Hello, have you got a call for me? At which point it picks up the call and transfers it inbound to your user using the phone. So that's what a registered trunk is, and that's what we're really looking for if we don't want to have to set up specific firewall rules within inside our OS console. And for some people, they've maybe actually got an ISP router here, in which case to make this work with a non-registered trunk, which I'll talk to you a little bit more about in a moment, then we would need to make port forwarding and things happen in here. But in this scenario, if we have a registered trunk from a provider, which is often, if you're here in Australia, an NBN style service anyway, then your requests are all pulling from your VoIP provider. You don't actually need to put any firewall rules in here to actually make it work. Now, on the other hand, if you have an unregistered trunk, this is probably a good example of Twilio in one of the ways, or the way I'm going to show you, is actually the opposite way around. The VoIP provider needs to find your OS console. That means you need to have a static IP address, or what we call an FQDN, a fully qualified domain name, that is then controlled by dynamic DNS. So you can buy into a dynamic DNS service, or you can use, I think there might be one already in the OS console, that basically as your public IP address updates, it updates the FQDN. So maybe you've got voip.mydomainname.com, all right, or VoIP, sillarsvoip.dynamicdns.com. Every time your IP address updates, then that FQDN now points to your IP address of your OS console. Because in an unregistered trunk way, then in basic terms, there are other ways of defining this. Actually, the VoIP provider, for an inbound call, actually will be directing the call directly to the IP address of your console. This means that if you have another router in front of your Unifi controller, your OS console, you will need to have port forwarding in place to make this work. Because the packet of information will arrive to the WAN interface of your ISP's router, which will stop it. You need to have a DMZ section. If I get a chance, I'll show you where I've done this in the config for my router. And it needs to be passed then on to the OS console. When we set this up, the OS console will create some basic firewall rules anyway. But this becomes a little bit more of a tricky scenario. I can also tell you that unless you subscribe to a static IP service for your mobile provision or a static IP address from Starlink, you won't be able to use an unregistered trunk in its basic terms that I'm talking about, because it's an inbound. It needs to see that. And when we talk about carrier grade NAT for Starlink, for example, or many mobile providers in their 4G, 5G, then unfortunately, you don't get an IP address that is physically assigned to the WAN interface of your ISP router or your OS console, and therefore this won't work. So you just need to be pick and choose how you're intending, or what provider you're intending to use to actually get this set up. But those are the key differences between a registered trunk in basic terms and an unregistered. In an unregistered, we're going to need to have IP address and firewalling and maybe port forwarding in this point of view happening, a static IP address or something that can update our dynamic DNS. In a registered trunk, we don't need to worry about that. We can use it on carrier grade NAT. All our requests are outbound. Even an inbound phone number is outbound. Our console is checking regularly for what's going on. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of a foundation of the key bits that we need and we're going to be using to set this up. It's my understanding that the underlying PBX, the phone software or the exchange that this is built on, or OS console, has got FreeSwitch, I think it's called, inside the Ubiquiti setup. If you know some bits about that, then there's many more other configs that you can do. I'm not going to give you any of those bits. If you can't do out of the tin to me, then it probably doesn't work easily. I will show you though actually how to get into see some of the error message which might be useful later on. So this is set our scene. Let's now just jump over to the basic starting point for installing all of this. Okay, so as I've mentioned before, you do need a Ubiquiti OS console. I'm using a UCG-Max. This has got 512 gig of standard storage in it. I've only got Unifi Network running at the moment, but we're going to use the Unifi Talk app and get that set up here in a moment. Also, we'll just want you to, so you've come to control plane, so settings here and control plane to get here. You also want to go to console and you want to tick the box here for SSH if you've not done it. The reporting in the web interface at the moment is pretty rubbish. And although the reporting you can get through SSH, which I'll show you about in a moment, has a lot of information and it may just prompt you in the right direction to be able to go, oh, I could work on it this way or that way. All right, so I will show you where to find those log files. So enable SSH and set a password for it. Those are probably my key bits. Then let's come over here. Like I said, I'm using a G2 phone, which is set up and ready to go. I'll show you a little bit of what you see on that screen in a moment. So I'm just going to hit set up here. I'm going to accept the terms and conditions. You're going to choose your country that you want to get this set up in. This is really up to you. As you can see, there is only a certain number of places you can choose. If you were to choose the United Kingdom, this will give you all of the United Kingdom's options for setting up with Unifi Talk. As you can see, there isn't really an option there that it allows for third party. I think it might do. I've just not gone through the configs that way. Australia, probably one of the simplest ones to use is Breeze Connect. So it is a third-party one, but it has been certified to work with Unifi Talk. It's a one-click, it fills everything in for you or gives you everything that you need. I'm going to choose international third-party SIP because this gives me the greatest control. I'm going to add a Twilio from the UK and a Factortel from Australia. But again, you're really looking to be able to set up third-party. I think you probably can do it maybe in the USA ones as well. But I'm just going to use this international one here. So then hit start setup. And we're just going to allow this to go through. Okay, so I've got this standard Ubiquiti Talk phone. Show you in the screen just so you can see what's on it. I've powered it up. It asked me to accept the conditions. It wants to know what user I want to assign this to. This is going to be the user that's going to have the extension. It's going to have a phone number to it. So I don't really want to assign it to my general Ubiquiti user that I created for Unifi Talk. For Unifi itself. The administrator, you can if you want. I would suggest you set up a different user. So I'm just going to set my user up here. So I'm assigning it to Paul Sillers. It's now going to go off and configure that phone in a moment. It will ask probably for the PIN number that's displaying on the front of it. No, it hasn't. It knows that it's all there. And it has now adopted and set that all up. So that really, in an initial stage, if you've got multiple phones, then go through and add those extra phones. So I'm actually now, we've added this one. I'm actually going to add another user and then going to assign another phone to that. So again, users are done in a similar way that we would do for anything else with inside Ubiquiti. So we can go to admin and users, and we can see in users, I've got one here called Paul Sillers. If I was to look at it here, I can see it's assigned to Unifi Talk. I can see the phone that it's physically assigned to. I don't have any numbers for it as yet. We'll talk about that. And we've got an extension number. You maybe don't like those. I'm going to start at an extension number here of 200. I'm going to add a next one in here. I can't remember. I think there's an apply just hidden under here. There we go. Let me just, sorry, I've moved myself. Whoop. Move my image, which I'm sure you don't really need to see anyway. But I just apply my changes. So I'm just going to have this called as extension 200. So I'm now actually going to create a new user. I will just talk about here, these phones are going to be on the same local network. Remember our diagram that we had? So these phones are maybe connected to a network switch that's giving them PoE power because they're PoE powered. And then that switch is plugged into the OS console here. That is what we need to make the communication between all of these devices happen. And so we can obviously then assign these to the different portions that are within inside here. But I'm just going to create another user here called John Smith. All right, I'm going to give them Unifi Talk. I'm going to give them now another extension. I'm going to give this person extension 300. These options here, if you want to use the phones as intercoms, hands-free, I'm not really going to cover those bits. They're probably less relevant for all of the bits. Same as doing voicemail and that. I want to show you actually how to get this working with your SIP trunks, your VoIP trunks, and actually making inbound and outbound calls. And then some of the rest of it can be done as learning. So I've created two users now. One of them has a phone assigned to them. I'm now actually going to plug in my other phone. So let me just take it. I haven't got two PoE injectors where I'm setting this up. So I'm just going to plug in my other phone and adopt it. And this is really in exactly the same way as we would do this with inside adding an access point in Unifi Network, for example. So let's just grab that cable. Okay, so this is my G3 phone that I've just put on there now. And so that should just be booting up. We should hopefully see on the screen as it starts to boot. And probably in a moment, we're going to be given a prompt in here that is going to ask us or spot that there is another device that's connected and wants us to actually adopt it. Probably if we wanted to go through and actually see this, there we go. So all I'm up in is phones. You can see I've got my Touch Pro sitting here. Let me just clear that. And I can now just hit adopt a device. It's asking it needs to be assigned to. We need to assign a physical phone to a person. So here's my John Smith. And what I was going to say is obviously those phones are physically connected to the LAN side of our console. What you can do, you could potentially have a remote user and you could use VPN access that you can have built into the phone. Using Unifi Identity app, and that will allow you to then have these phones remote. So they'll create a VPN and then talk to the console locally. So there are a few ways of doing that. I'm not going to cover that really at this moment in time. I want to show you how to get it running on the local network. I would always suggest you get it running in the local network first, and then once it's running in the local network, then you can build on your experience of everything else. So let's now just allow this to adopt. You can see that pretty much on the screen that I've got recording there, that is actually got the username and everything already showing. If we go into these settings here, there's not a lot we can do on the phone itself if you've not seen this. So there are some contact lists. We'll see whether we get a chance to do that, but you can assign those so they're scrollable on the screen. But then again, other options that you have. If I just hit the button on the screen here on this phone, you can see there that we've got the options for phone, protect, access, or identity. So if we've got Unifi Protect running, we can have a look at other cameras that are working on. If we have got Unifi Access, we can do door opening and those bits and pieces as well. So we've got quite a few options that are available to us if we want to do that directly from the phone itself. So at the moment, we're just waiting for that to finish updating. Okay, so we can just see on the screen that's actually just coming to the end of its actual update. Obviously, there are regular updates coming out for this, so do be aware. Obviously, like I said, my other phone here is in the disconnected stage because I've only got one PoE injector. But obviously, if you had a PoE switch, that would be your ideal to have all of these connected to that. But you can use a PoE injector if you want to. So this is our starting point, and then I'm going to just show you the next phases that we're going to do. We're going to go and set up a couple of SIP trunks. We're going to first do a trunk there with Twilio, which is the more difficult one to do, and we're going to get that set up so that we can get inbound and outbound UK numbers working on this. And then we're going to add an Australian one, and I can show you that the Australian numbers work from there as well, and just talk a little bit about how we manage those inbound calls backwards and forwards when we have multiple phone numbers, and how I would actually do this for using the digital assistant. So let's just wait for that phone to actually start up, and there we go, it's just coming on screen. Hopefully in a moment we will see it appear here. Oh look, and it says it's ready to be updated again. No, it's online, so it now shows it is updated. So we should be able to see, if I look on my phone here, obviously I've got our ringer volume. So I'm just going to bring the ringer volume down slightly so I don't disturb people where I'm doing the testing. Got all of our setting options in here. If you were going into settings, you can work through a lot of these things with calls. Again, the work remotely type of thing we talked about, you could set up that directly with the user. The users, again, are done in here, in users. And we can set up an identity endpoint, as you can see in this version, because we've got a soft phone. I haven't really going to cover some of those bits. That is available in some versions. I thought it was only available if you had Unifi Talk as a service, but we may, if we get a few minutes, have a little look at that. But we can use this one-click VPN, get a QR code, and we can set that up on the phone itself over here. So those are the most of the bits that we might want on the phone. Quick look at what we've got on the screen. Obviously, you've got your favorites. Contacts we can load to the phone. So we've got our normal extension numbers, the other extensions on there, and we can put contact lists on there. Contact lists can be defined from here. So we could add a new user here and say, let's put this test user. Let's just make that a little bit neater. And then maybe we can give it a phone number, 07456 456 456. Number label, that's home. Haven't got an email address for them. Let me just move myself over here. I can choose add. So I've now got this contact that I can use to be called. And I believe that you can now assign this potentially to a phone if you want to. I'm not quite sure how you do that. Manage contact lists. So this one here, we could create a list by the looks of it. So all staff. So if you wanted a list of all the regularly called ones that you wanted staff to actually connect to and use, so that they were always in that list, this is how you would actually do it. So this is sort of a bit more of a slightly more advanced things that you can do with inside VoIP or the Unifi Talk settings. So we can choose a select contact list. Looks like you can have multiple. So if I now save that and apply that to the phone, for instance, my expectation would be that now if we were to look in the directories, you can see there our test user is actually in there. And now I've got quick ways I can just click that and make a call. Keypad's our normal keypad, and voicemail is where we get to for our voicemail. Most of those I probably won't cover in this video, but I do want to just show you now how we move on and actually start getting those SIP trunks running. Okay, so let's progress on to the actual interesting bit of setting all of this up. Now, as I said, I've chosen a worldwide setup of this. So if we come down to settings, from settings, we can see in here, I think it is under system. All right, we want to, if we're going to use Twilio, this is significant. If we're not, doesn't really matter. So let's just remind ourselves again of this diagram. These are the key things we want to find from our supplier: a username and a password. Sometimes the username is the phone number. We want to know our phone number. That's in a format that is generally plus area country code and the number, so +440730882936. That would be the full for the Tech Geeks Brisbane number. We want to know what the IP address, or what we call the FQDN, the fully qualified domain name, is of our VoIP provider. That's for our outbound connection. And we want to know, is this a registered, are we going to be registering the trunk? Yes or no. Remember, if it's a registered trunk, we should have no problems. However, we've got this set up. If it's unregistered, then the likelihood is we're going to need some firewall rules and stuff to actually make this work. We're also going to need to know the IP addresses for the VoIP providers servers that they use. It's basically a level of protection that we're adding in here, so that we expect the call, once we've made this request, we're expecting the return portion of it to only come from a certain set of IP addresses. That's going to avoid other people trying to freeload off the side of our setup and essentially be able to make calls through it, which is what we had many years ago with VoIP providers. It doesn't matter who it was, that people would actually be able to get access to your device and make outbound calls. This means that we only expect the communication between these devices to happen. So as long as we've collected most of that information, we should be good to go. We're going to try the unregistered trunk to start with. A little bit more messy and a little bit more horrible, but some of you might have Twilio as a good example for this. So in Twilio, we're unregistered. That means we're going to have firewall rules changed to be able to make sure that this Twilio here can actually see our OS console. So there are a few things we're going to need to check to make sure that that actually works, and I will step you through some of those. But let's just hop on over to the Twilio console first, and I'll just step you through the key bits that you need to get this set up. Okay, so there are a number of ways to set this up. I have done this using the elastic SIP trunking. You can't seem to find this from the menu immediately over here. There are ways from over here, I think, for setting up SIP domains and bring your own trunks. And there are a few documents out for those type of things, but I have not really actually been able to make that work. So the way I've done this is right or wrong, using the elastic SIP trunking. So I actually just searched for it up here. And I think it came up as a straight option in there we go. And so I just went to the dashboard, and that gives us this bit. This made it a bit easier to get all of the pieces of information we needed to make it work. And the great thing is this, you actually get some really useful logs in this, which really help how to get this all set up. And you can see this more. So from this point, it's probably better than a registered one, because at the registered one, it's all reliant on what your ISP is providing you, and they may not give you access to that, but here with Twilio you do. So what are we wanting to do? We're wanting to essentially create a trunk. There are a few bits that we're going to need to create from this. So here we go. You're going to create your trunk following these standards. You just need to give it a name, and realistically the rest of this bit in here it fills itself automatically in. So this is our trunk, our container that's going to allow our communications to happen. Now, our termination portion of it and our origination are the most important, and they're the bits that really fall over. So our termination, that's what we talked about in our diagram over here, which is our trunk's proxy FQDN. That's the bit that we want as our first bit. So it allows us to actually define this. So I've called this the Tech Geeks UK. All right. And this is going to be our name that goes in here, uk.pstn.twilio.com. That's our proxy name, and we're going to put that in our settings. You then need to an IP access control list and a credentials control list. Now, I don't think I can show you what these are from here. So let me just go back here, and I think it's in this credentials list here. We should have both of these. So let's just have a little look in the credentials list. This shows you, so your credentials here for this one here is your username that you're going to use to log on to the trunk, and the password. So you are then going to assign that in your control list, and it's going to link these two up together. Then you're going to need your IP control list. So your IP control list is your permanent IP address, is your static IP address for your connection. This is mine here from where I am at this current in time on a BT internet connection. This could be your dynamic DNS entry. So you can, I think, in here, put in here, I can't remember whether in this one you can, whether you can actually have this as an FQDN. So this could not be an actual IP address. This could actually be something like the Tech Geeks VoIP.thetechgeeks.com. Some providers allow you to do that. I think when I set this up, I didn't. I actually had to put my IP, which means that if my IP address rolls around and rotates, then I would need to come back and change this in here. So if you're a home user, this is probably less of a useful thing, although our public IP addresses don't change too much. So those pieces of information are what's actually going to get assigned on our termination, or sorry, I think it was our termination here, bit here, and our credentials list. So those are really important that we get that right, and we've chosen those. So those are our bits of where is Twilio going to find our device at the other end. Our origination, that's again it coming from the PSTN, your normal phones, back to your device. So if you notice on here, we had this signaling port. So VoIP can use a lot of numbers of ports. What we're doing is we're actually assigning it and saying we're going to have communications on here. This makes it a little bit easier when you're doing your firewall rules, because instead of it choosing random ports, we can get it to specifically choose this port. But the key that we've got here is that our IP address must be in this format: SIP : your IP address, and then your signaling port 6767 in this instance. Those are our key bits that we want in here. I've got a phone number assigned to it. That's our UK phone number. So that's okay. And we're going to be using that when we actually now set it up at the other end. And you could have multiple numbers assigned to this trunk. So this trunk, if you like, is our tunnel, is a pipe. And through that is going to be traveling multiple phone numbers if we want, but obviously all of our phone calls and everything else as well. And this is part of our key thing, is to know that this, if you like, in our proper format, is our phone number. The world talks in these type of phone numbers, so we just need to be aware of that. All right, so those are my key bits that I needed to create inside Twilio. Most of the stuff, when you do this with your own provider, they will have given you all of that, because you're probably in most instances going to be using a registered trunk. But if you're setting up this way, you may choose to do it the other way round, and obviously be using Twilio as a way of doing it. So I want to show you the most complicated one first, if you like, so we can get this one out of the way. So third-party SIP. And this is where for most people it falls down, because we go into here and none of these are what we're connecting to. There's not even one for Twilio, even though Ubiquiti use that in the back end. So what can we use? We're going to use custom. And then people go, well, where do I put in all of this information that I know that I need? So we're going to create fields. So let's call this, I'm going to call this Twilio UK. These are where we're going to put in everything that we want. So we're going to call it proxy, because that is one of the variables that's needed. All right, as long as you stick to these variable names, you should be good. We are going to need username. Going to need password. You are going to need, and this is not necessarily defined, but I do find it's better to put this in here, which is the transport. So because we can do these communications in UDP or TCP, it's easier if we're going to do this in TCP, and register. So those should be our key fields that we actually need in there. Proxy, username, password. I'm just checking from my list that I've got proxy, password, username, register, transport. Done. So now you can see our fields have already been put in here. Let's fill those in, but I want this one to handle all calls, all inbound and outbound calls. Is the greatest way to do it. So now we just need to go back and pick off everything else that we had in here. Here is our proxy. All right, this should be all that's actually needed in here. Sometimes we have to put a region in here and it seems to fill it out slightly differently. So we'll have a check there in a moment. We then look in here and I think we will need our credentials list. So hopefully you've made a list of usernames and the passwords that you created. So we have got our a username there. So our username is going to go into our username box. Our password is going to be what we're going to use here. So let me just grab that. Okay, so hopefully I've remembered how to set this up. Will be there. TCP is our transport. Register is false because remember this is an inbound. Now it gets a little bit more interesting. Our phone numbers. So our phone numbers are going to go in the format that they were shown in. We're also going to need our networking information here in a moment. So this actually shows you what proxy you should use. So I could have used the one, but I'm actually going to use the one like I said in Dublin. So let me just correct up what I've done for the proxy. So it should just be a little bit more localized for me, which is use Ireland, but you can obviously use the one that's closest to you. We defined a phone number, so I should have a phone number already defined here by reference. So I need it in that format, so that's the same as this. We're just going to add a plus. This is what your phone system is actually going to use when it's sorting the numbers out. So let's put that in here and add it. Obviously, if you have multiple phone numbers on this trunk, you can add multiple in here. Now, this is where it becomes a little bit more interesting because this is where we need to keep a list of all of the IP addresses that Twilio run that could potentially send the traffic to us. They're useful in here. They have networking information. And in networking information here, it shows us all of the IP addresses that are actually going to be used. Now, you can put in all of the ones that are relevant to you if you want to. And you might need to open some of these up a little bit more as well. There are quite a few to be added in. You can then work it from there, depending on where you've set Twilio up as your base for everything to actually come from. So let me just start putting those in. Now in some other documentation, I actually find that these are a /30, which means if I use a /30 at the end, I get these next 3 IPs as it. It's potential that you don't have to put every single one of these in if it's not coming from those locations, but it's as simple as really. So let's just quickly add those IP addresses in. So again, I'm just going from region to region, quickly just putting those in. If you don't cover all of the regions, it's not necessarily a problem, but obviously if one region went down for some reason, you'd still be getting the traffic, but it might then come from a different IP address. And then you would wonder why you weren't getting inbound traffic. So my suggestion would be that you do just try and put all the IP addresses in that Twilio give you, or your service provider give you, because it will just mean that you're covered in all eventualities. But like I said, I'm trying to just get away with what I know makes this work. There are probable ways of improving your overall performance on this if you know a little bit more, but I just want to show you actually how to get the end-to-end and actually make calls work in this. So let me just complete off getting these here. Almost got to the final ones to do. There we go. All right, so let's get this last one in here and we should be good to go. So we have got here all of our information that we need. We're a custom provider, given it a name, given all the proxy information, username, password. Hopefully I've got that bit right. Transport. You could restrict this to only calling certain countries. So you could restrict this to just be UK. So if a UK number was being called, I will show you some little bits if you're doing it this way that makes it a little bit more interesting to how to make this work. But it is all workable. I've got my phone number and I've got my allowed IPs. Remember, just remind ourselves again why we're doing this. We've got an unregistered trunk, so we need to know all the IP addresses that can try and send traffic to us, just so it can't be abused. So let's now just hit apply. All right, and that is actually now live. Now we've got our first SIP provider in there. Where do we go from here? So I like to do a couple of things at this point. My first thing I'm interested really is using the smart attendant. Why? The smart attendant is our, if you like, our receptionist. Our receptionist can receive multiple phone numbers, multiple trunks, and then it can send it out to whichever phones or groups of phones we want to. So I would suggest, even if you have one phone, that this is probably a useful thing to set up in your step, because it allows greater flexibility as you go on, and you've built it right from the beginning. So I'm actually just going to call this entry queue. This is where the calls are going to come into first. So here's our entry queue. I've only got one number, but I can add other numbers to it. I could give this an extension if we wanted to. Now we've got some options. Do we want hold music, run it, uphold music? And again, there's a whole lot of stuff for you to configure as well. Do you want this to be only certain business hours? And you could set up schedules. I'm not really worried about that. Do you want to enable extension on when enabled callers can dial an extension to connect with a user or group without going through the smart attendant? Do I want somebody to be able to directly call an extension number? At the moment, I don't. Do you want your smart attendant to say when they answer? Okay, so we've got some options. Would we like it to play a message? Would we like to say +1 for this, 2 for sales, 3 for support? You can set up all of those bits with inside here, but you don't have to. So let me go on here. I've got voice 1. I'm just going to put hello, thanks for calling the tech geeks. We will now connect you with one of our team. Now again, you don't have to put anything here if you don't want to, and it can just go straight through to the group of phones if you want to. You can have a little play here, what's going on.
Hello, thanks for calling the tech
See if you're happy with what that is, and we can move on to next. What do we want to happen? I don't want anything to go on with this at the moment, because I'm not doing any pressed calls. I can't remember in a moment. So I don't want it to do any calls. I don't want, so we'll have a check in a moment. I can't remember this time whether it allows me to do anything past that. So this is my queue, and we can have multiple queues. We can assign them different numbers. Once we've got a queue here, we can now choose which user, all right, this actually goes on. So I don't want a key press prompt. I just literally want to ring some phones. And so I want to maybe ring Paul, and maybe I want it to ring John. Now, John's phone, unfortunately, at the moment isn't online, so I can't add this into this setup at this moment in time. But we could obviously get this to ring a phone, or we could get it to ring a group of phones. So if we want to do a group of phones, then what we can do again in our users and admins and groups, maybe call this all phones. And I think if we do it this way, here's John and Paul. We've got our group of all phones created now. What we should be able to do, I think, in here is assign this. We might have to come back and see whether we can set this to call a group of users, or whether it is just because I've only got one user online that it's actually working in this way. You normally have to have those users set up to get them here. All right, so some of this I'm learning as I go. So actually this only does to a single user. What we need to come back to is phone assignments, and we can see we've got our users that we can create here, but we've also got our groups that we can create here. So I'm going to create a group called all phones. I can give this an extension number if I wanted to, or the group number that they can all use if we wanted to. Call hammer simultaneously, they'll all ring. Who has the voicemail at the end of it. And now I'm going to, so all of them could have that potential in it. Let's just see if I move myself over here. Let's see how we can add users to this. All the group users are in there, which is fine. Let's just see whether we actually have to assign a phone number to it before we're allowed to do the add. No, it's not about that. So what have I missed? Call handling. is simultaneous. Oh, add members. So I've just forgotten to add members here. So here we go. We can add our members. We've now got a group. So just remind you, I'd thought that I'd done it in the users back here. That's not the correct place to do it. So I'm just going to clear out my group that I created in here. Manage groups, it should have been. Not create groups, manage groups. No. Why does that not allow me to do that? All right, so maybe it's because I've now created that group that it's removed it over onto the other side. That's okay. So again, back in here, we've got our groups that we've created. All phones are in here. So we should now be using our assistant, and this should now allow us, here we go, all phones. So now if somebody calls this number, they'll get played this message, and then all phones in that group will actually ring. So this is the starting point of how I like to actually make all of this actually set up and work before we start the next bit of it. So we've set our stuff up in Twilio. We have given ourselves our third-party SIP provider, which is here. All right, so now we want to start getting ready to actually see if this works. Phone Designer basically allows you to create screen designs and everything else on the phone. We're not really too worried about that. Voicemail, you can learn a bit about how to set voicemail up. Your call settings are in here. Do you want call recording on, translation, so from voice to text? Do you want to block certain things happening? And do you want a specific dial code for all of, if you're in a certain area? So most of this stuff is actually assigned. We can actually have a look at our users again and just see if we need to assign them a phone number. So at the moment, this person, although it was in that group, we need to assign the number that's available to them. And you can just assign the number like this. And so now that group will receive all of these calls, and an outgoing number, it will go out through the group that we've already actually set in place. So let's just apply that in place. Let's do John's as well. He's got his device, but his device is currently offline. So I can assign his number there as well. Okay, because this is defining a specific number to that extension. Let's just run it without that number on the extension, and let's just see what happens. Now it looks like we need to actually assign this number directly. We'll have a little look about that again in a moment and see if we can get around that. I think we might be able to do that in a moment. Let me just have a little look. Yes, I thought that'd be right. So we came up to contacts, we came up to, phones and assignments, came to groups, look in our group, and we can now give all of those phones this number. It will be removed. So now that user doesn't have a specific number. All of those phones are going to respond to that one number, which is more of a logical way of happening. So that if we had multiple numbers, it could be assigned to a group. The group then, and as you see where we add another number for Australia, it doesn't matter those handsets, they're all using that same number. So that's a pretty good way of where we've got to. So now we need to think about how do we actually start testing this and actually making this work. Well, obviously some of our first things is going to be make an outbound call. What I'd like to just do first is just set this up so I can show you where you can find some of the log files so that we can start troubleshooting as we go along, because this is the bit that becomes a little bit more messy. But before we do that, let's just talk about our inbound rules. So remember, we're on an OS console. So when we're on an OS console, let's just have a little look in here and into network. Come down to settings here. And we're going to look in our policy engine. Depends on which version you are running. You'll actually see gateway. Gateway is one of our interesting ones in here because we've got external to gateway is what we're interested in. External to gateway. We will see in here that we have a rule allowed. I think I already possibly put this in, but you probably don't need it now to experiment it. I've got an allow a ping to the WAN because I like to test whether this actually responds. And that port 6767 is one that we'd obviously defined permanently in place so that it would always communicate on that one port. So as we get everything set up to test, I'd just like to get a couple of windows ready to try and help me, and I'll show you how to find some of the log file information. So you can use command or PowerShell or whatever you've got going in here. So I'm going to have two windows. So there's two log files that we can actually have a look at. Now remember, you enabled previously in here your SSH. So you can SSH to the local IP address of the device. So it's going to look like this: SSH, root, and then the IP address of your device, 5.1. The first time you do this yourself, it will probably ask this: do you want to continue connecting with the fingerprint that you've got, which you say yes to, and you've now trusted that. Then you're going to put in your password that you set up for SSH, and it will log you in. Now, if you're not used to these type of commands, you're probably going to find yourself a little bit lost. So here's a few things. Arrow up will scroll through commands that we used before, and tab will help us scroll through. So we're going to do CD /start. This is going to bring us, called change directory, bring us to the top. All right, we can do dir to show us what is actually in there, and we're looking for the folder name called var. So now we can do cd space var. I could have done cd space v a and keep hitting tab until it knows how to fill the rest in, and DLR or ls will actually show us what's in here. We're interested in the one that says log, so again we're going to do cd log. Now there are two folders in here, so you can see that we've got Unifi Talk in here as well, and we've also got free switch, which is what is based on here. So I'm going to do log the talk one first. So cd Unifi, as you can see, I've hit tab and it gets me to there. Then I push the dash and hit tab again, it fills the rest in, or you can type the whole bit in. Do an ls, and we can see these are archived ones. So as it goes through each day, it rolls it up into an archive and moves it on. So Unifi -talk -log. I'm going to use a command called tail. So I want it always to tell me what's happening at the end of the file, so I don't have to keep scrolling back through the file. So tail -f, Unifi tab I hit, so it fills in the word. All right, and this is now going to scroll. As changes happen, it's going to scroll those changes through. So over on this screen here, I'm going to do the same. SSH root at 10.1.5.1. Again, it's going to ask my password, which is my SSH password, and log in. Again, I want to go to var. I'm just doing it quicker now to show you through. ls to have a look what's in there. Still need to go to log. And then I think if it was there, free switch was in there. So index free switch. Okay, so we've got one called free switch log. So I'm going to do the same, tail -f, free switch. Now, you don't have to do any of this. If yours works out the box and you don't have any problems, then really don't worry about this at all. This is if you want to make sure you don't know why the calls are working or not working. This is probably a really good point of being able to use these. It will give you some information of what's actually going on. Right, so first things first, let's just get this camera going so you can see what is actually going on the other phone. Okay, so what I'm just going to do is I'm just going to try phoning a phone number and see what happens. Immediately I got a call failed. So this is now where our troubleshooting needs to start. And let's just see what I've messed up. I'm presuming it's probably going to be a password, I expect. But let's have just a little look through and see if we can see anything on here that is useful to help us see what is happening. And we can just scroll back here, outgoing call barred, see? So in here we know that we're not allowed to make any outbound calls for some reason. Authentication failure, bad credentials, which is what I actually thought was probably the case, because I honestly in Elastic SIP over here, I didn't actually remember, or couldn't actually remember the password that I'd set up in this credentials list. I was pretty sure I'd set a specific one, but obviously I haven't. So I'm just going to choose change password here. All right, so my password is changed. Now I need to go back into my SIP setup and get that change made there as well, which was under system and third party, and in here modify my password and apply it. All right, so we've now applied that. Just give it a moment, and let's try a phone number again over on this phone here. It's trying. All right, so the setup's not complete yet because I believe it's resetting itself from the change that I just made. So we'll just have to give it a moment and then we'll try a call again. So we can go to recent. Tell it to call it again. All right, here we go. And actually my mobile phone is now ringing. So that call actually worked. So hopefully that found you. There's a lot of information in there that you probably won't use, but this is at least a quick way to see if something's happening and going wrong. So we know outbound is working. Now what I want to try and see is what happens for inbound. So I'm just going to grab my mobile phone and let's just try and see what we can do for my mobile phone inbound call. I can hear it trying to start ringing. All right, so let me just do that again so you can hear that it's working with the volume up. So inbound call, put this up to the microphone.
Hello, thanks for calling the Techniques. We will now connect you with one of our team.
So you can see that the inbound call came, our attendant played our message, and then you could see on the screen that it then told the phone to ring. Okay, so where we've got to, as you can see, we've got inbound and outbound calls working, and we did a little bit of troubleshooting from this section. We've got one set up here using Twilio, and like I said, if you're using this is probably the most complicated way. What I'm going to go on to now and use is FactorTel. FactorTel is probably more like you're going to have, remember we're going to need just that collection of those very basic sets of information that we need: a username, a password, a phone number, the IP address or the fully qualified domain of the trunk that we're going to connect to, or their servers. We're going to, in this instance, we're going to register it, which is going to mean we're having this outbound connection. So it will use multiple NAT. We can use 4G connections for this. We can use Starlink to make this work. But we do just probably need the IP addresses that it's going to be coming from, just to give us that extra level there of security. So let's head on now and get the configuration work done. So exactly the same as we have done before. So we're going to do create a new one. All right. Again, it's going to be custom. I'm just going to call this Factortel AU. I might come back and rename it if I hadn't got that correct before. Okay, so we're going to obviously create up our fields that we had in the same way as we had before. Proxy, they don't have to be in any order. So this doesn't really matter as long as we get all of the key ones that we need. Password, register. All right, now I think that in this instance, this is all that we actually need. Let me just double check my little screen grab here so I know that I've got all the right information. Okay, so I've just gone and found all the information that I need to be able to actually get this set up. So let's just fill in this information backwards. So I'll put my password in there. This one, my username happens to be a special code, so we're going to put that one in there. Register in this instance is going to be true because we want it to register. All right, and we just need to now find, so let me first find the phone number while I'm here. So this is going to be +61. And we need to obviously take the 0 out so we can add the phone number. I'll get this to probably do all calls in a minute. But well, maybe I'll just do the Australian ones and we'll do that. Let me just now go back here to the setup on my other screen that I've got here of what I need to actually do. Just 2 minutes, just open this one up because it has a nice little thing of everything that is needed under their SIP configuration. And so in their instance, all we need is this in the proxy. And then they just give us a list of their IP addresses that they use. So again, we're just going to put these in. Oops, 1, 2, 3, 0, 24. Obviously, these are important and we need to get these right. If we don't get these right, you will be again wondering why the call is not actually happening. And it will never probably get through to your voice server at all. But hopefully it will be something in the logs at that point. All right, so we've got our phone number. We've got everything in there that is correct and needed. So now I've got that this way round. Let me just do my labeling so it matches up. I can now select countries that I want to make outbound calls to if I want to. So I could use this trunk just for an outbound call like that, or we could set it for all, but obviously we've got 2 at the moment, then they're going to be used for all. If you want to know, it does take a little while each time for the whole system to reset. So if you're still using your login here for your SSH and looking at that log file, you'll actually see it rewriting it and restarting it. So do give it probably 30 to 120 seconds or so to start up, or once you make some of those changes. So what about our inbound calls? All right, our inbound calls, we need to remind our digital assistant what numbers it is actually answering for now. As you remember, we had just put this one number in here. We can now select our second number as well. So now all of the calls that are coming, I'll just put my imagery over here while I can apply it. So all calls that come to that number will now also be answered by this assistant, and obviously we'll put it out to this ring group. Now our ring group, we want to just again remind ourselves just to make sure that our ring group is also accepting the phone numbers for everything. So it's not. So we're just going to accept this. Oh no, it's okay. So I think this means that all phones by standard have this phone number. It should receive the other inbound calls. So you're setting the primary outbound number, if you like, on this. So that should already be as it was. We will look at something else once I know that this is actually working. And last time I did this, it did work because I've got one that's set for Australia and one that's set for New Zealand, and it was reading in the wrong number that arrived. So let me just on my mobile, let me just now see if I can phone this number, and we'll see what actually happens. Just got to find the number first. Here we go. All right, so we can see this inbound happen over here. We could see that something worked. So we just want to have a little look and see what number it felt that was maybe called, because it probably scrolled past pretty quickly. We can see it connected with Factortel, and we're looking to see if we can find a phone number in here. Call rejected. There we can go. So it was coming from my mobile number, but it probably for some reason in here was trying to call a different number. Let's just try and see if we can spot what it was trying to do. here we go. No, that was our that was earlier today when we were testing it, or the other logs that we were testing out. So that's okay. Let's spin down here a little bit more. Let's just keep having a little look through. The number must come in. We should have seen a caller ID for this number, and I'm obviously just not quite seeing it in here at the moment. So let's just ring that number again, just see if we can spot what was happening. Okay, so just pause the video a couple of minutes while I just had a look, and this was more actually my inability to check, and is actually a typo in here. So what we can actually see is not a missing phone number. We'll probably have to fix that in a moment, but actually just have a look here that it talks about the talk ACL here. So it says that basically it blocked this 103.226.173.36 from actually connecting to send us data. And that means that's in a rejected IP. If we actually have a look back in my IP ranges, you'll actually see I made a complete mess up of this IP address range here when I put it in, because I managed to put 2 dots in it. So it can be as simple as that. So let me just add this back. Let's remove one of those from there. Let's change that to be this. I don't think I even got that right then either, did I? Look, see? So I'd obviously not copied the 1 enough. Let's get rid of the dot. Let's have a look and put that to a 24 and add it. Right, let's apply that. Let's come back to our 2 boxes. We can just wait here while the free switch, the config here restarts itself. Then I'll make the call again, and I think we'll then probably fail again, but we'll at least know that something's working. So we're just waiting for this to finish restarting here. This one here is the Unifi Talk log, if you're not sure, and this one over here is the free switch log. So this will now finish starting in a moment, and then I will make that phone call again from my phone, and hopefully we will then get another error, or most likely to then get another error, and then we'll be able to fix that to show you how the calls are going to be working for this as well. So let's just make that call again. I think it has probably restarted long enough. All right, so again, we got a failed call, and it wasn't seeming to be able to allocate that out. Again, we seem to have some errors showing on this side. Wasn't totally sure on the timestamp. Oh, there we go. I just hit enter to be able to upload a little bit more from this one. Let's just try and see if we scroll back a little bit, if we can spot what is going on this time. So this just sometimes will be you probably, if you only have 1 inbound for this, by the way, I've obviously got 2 SIPs running at the moment, SIP trunks. If you only got 1, you probably won't be having this issue. I'm just doing this because some people might have multiple. So if you're only having 1, you will probably find the result here to be slightly different to what I've got. So I'm just going to make that call again. So this side says it's being made to an unassigned number. And I think that that's possibly where we're going to start seeing some of the problems. So I'm just going to try this again with the full number, which will be the +61 in the front of it. So let me just try and see if we can do that. So let's just try and ring this time. All right, so this in here is saying it is incoming call to unassigned number detected. So I've either now put my number in wrong. So let's go and have a look at our config and what's being expected in here. So +6173088293 is correct. So that is all as we would expect it to. We're going to have a look in our system attendant over here. It's expecting to receive both inbound calls. And then this should now be then sending it to this ring group. This ring group here should theoretically the ring group doesn't have both numbers. That's interesting, isn't it? All right, so it looks like when you do this in a ring group, the ring group here, it can't accept both numbers at the same time. So that's okay. So what I'm just gonna do here is I'm just gonna create a slightly different change to how my groups have worked. Like I said, this is a little bit rough and ready somewhere. So this is going to be UK number. I'm just going to try and think this through of how this would actually work to make this happen, because I had assumed that you'd just be able to select both in this, but it's going to see it as a slightly different group, but you can have different phones in it. So we can work around it by just now assigning just this here. So we're going to have a UK number. And then I'm just going to create a new group, and I'm hoping that if I do a new group now, and we'll say AU number, that we can actually complete this this way around. We need to add members, so John and Paul are both in that. Okay, so we've now got two groups with two lots of phones in it. I'm pretty sure that our digital assistant was allowed to we assigned both numbers to it, so it just wasn't sure what to do with it. And I'm not quite sure now. That might be interesting. So you could have two, and like I said, I'm learning as I'm going, so there could be a couple of ways of making this work. So let's call this the UK entry. So I don't know whether it's going to allow us to edit this. How do we edit this? Up here, don't we? Okay. Where's our name? There we go. UK entry queue. And then in this instance, all I can do now is add another entry queue. So maybe I'm going to do this AU entry queue. So obviously this just allows you could have different phones allocated out to this as you went along. So this is sort of just getting this way selected the way we need it. Global, next, no. I'm going to put this back to this, but I might choose a different voice for this one. There's only one voice in here. This is going to have a different welcome message to the other one. Don't want it to do anything in that respect. So we now should have this queue here, and we should now be able to ring phones, and I should now be able to ring the Australian number. All right, so I've now created two queues for two numbers. Just a different way of actually getting this defined up and working. So like I said, learning as we go, but we should now be able to give ourselves an inbound test. Let's have a little look. I'm still not convinced it's going to totally work, because I think I've spotted an issue that we've had before when I've done this, because I've got two different country codes in here. But let me just go back to our contacts here. Let me phone this. All right, so did we get an error over here? Just trying to see if it actually parsed it as we went along, or did we see anything happen over here? Sometimes you have to enter if it gets a little bit stuck. All right, so we've still got the same problem that we had before, where it says incoming call to unassigned number detected. Okay, so you do have to travel a little bit further back in the log files to actually find out what's happening. And this is generally going to be around about how a phone number is being presented or is being seen by your VoIP provider. And sometimes if it's being phoned locally in the country, it won't have that +61 in front of it. And actually, if we actually have a look here, we can actually see the number that is being called does not have the plus number in the front of it. And so as far as it's concerned, it doesn't exist, because when we went to our SIP connection in here, So this is not about having these two different providers in here. It's trying to match this exact number up. So the way that I've seen to get around this, if you do have some number issues in here, then just add in that other number that matches up with how you're seeing it in the log files. So if you can make outbound calls and then the inbound calls are dropping, look again for, like I've just showed you, maybe the ACL's wrong, and you're not haven't been approved to be coming from the specific IP range that you've said, or there's something missing in the way that the IP address maybe works for you in there. So these are just the little bits of changes that you might need to make to actually get this all working. But generally the essence of what I've done has got you to the part that at least the packet of information, the portion of that VoIP call is getting to your OS console. So let's just try again and see if we can get this working. All right, so this should get a welcome if we now phone this time. No, it's still got an unassigned number. Isn't that interesting? All right, so let's just try this again. All right, so we're still getting unassigned number. So let's do the same as we did before over in this window here. Let's have a look at the end of the log file. Let's see if we can find out here what number was actually being called. Let me just call it again. All right, so the number fails. And so we can have another little look. So we can always hit Control-C in this window over here. That stops it. And so we can now then just start ringing up or scrolling up to actually have a look at our messages that are in here. And like I said, I'm not an expert at this. And so some of you might be much better at finding this. I'm also dyslexic, so finding my way around some of this with lots of numbers and letters isn't always my speediest place to be. So we're just having a little look around here. What I'm also aware of is one other glaring thing that I haven't done. I may have changed it on here, but I've certainly not changed it in the groups to accept that inbound number. And obviously we can't get it to accept two numbers, so we'll get it to accept that number because that's probably the one that's actually going to work. And then we want to look in our digital assistant, so our AU digital assistant. Now our AU digital assistant should be able to accept two numbers, as you can see. So there are a few different ways to add this up, and if you only got one phone, then you won't have a problem with this ring group option that I'm using, and so you probably won't even need to do anything with that at all. So let's just ring out here. Let's have a little look. Probably once this is restarted over on this side, we'll probably find that this will actually ring and work now that I've remembered that I've got to put it in all of those places. So you've just got to keep following around till you find the right place for it to work. All right, so you can see here it's now ringing.
Calling us. Please select from one of the following options.
And you can now see over there that it's just passed it through and it is actually working. And that bit is actually done. All right, so when I make a call, it's going to call out from my default number. And there's a little bit of things that you could probably work around on there. You might be able to, and I haven't really done a lot of it in here, you might be able to set your specific outbound number. I think it's done on users, if I remember rightly. So if we come here, so you can build up a whole list of phone numbers in here. And like I said, use that log file to find the information that you need of exactly how your VoIP provider is providing that inbound number, and you'll be able to get it matched up. So if we look in our users in here, and I think we can assign our numbers. This is my outgoing number, but I could have now assigned an Australian outbound number if I'd wanted to as well. You can be one or the other in there. So you could define, if you had lots of extension numbers, you could again have this user accepting an inbound call on the main number, but when they make a call out, it goes out as a slightly different number that's just for their extension if you wanted to. So look, that is the essence of how we've managed to get two SIP providers running. Hopefully I've just shown you what, if you're in Australia, what you'd normally probably find on an NBN connection, which is very much similar to that FactorTel one. If you're in Australia, then you can just choose Australia and choose Breeze Connect, and it will configure all these bits up for you. That's probably the easiest one to do. But depending on where you are in the world, or if you want to add in other providers, because often maybe if we're a bigger business, we might want a UK number like we've got here, an Australian number. You'll just need to meddle around with exactly how this looks, and the same for your outbound, so that it's formatted in the way that you want it to be as well. There are, like I said, lots of other things around calls, enabling voicemail. You can obviously get your voicemail from your phone as well. I'm not really going to cover that as well. There's some basic call logs in here, so inbound, outbound calls, so you can see, but these are not troubleshooting logs. These are only logs for if you want to track how long somebody was on a phone call for, what they were actually doing. Obviously, you could now add that as an actual contact if you wanted to. Remember, we talked about how to push those onto the devices as well and creating contact lists around it. Obviously your system log, there is a little bit sometimes that comes in here, but as you can see, not greatly. So you really probably want to use those two log file instances here that I've shown you about to help you get to that stage. So we've done Twilio, we've done FactorTel. Then just a quick look at the phone itself. As you'll see on here, you have a number of options, and this is really simple. If we use the menu button, we can set up protect. Let me just show you how to do that. So you're going to click the protect button. I think you've got to accept sometimes the terms and conditions. It will then want you to scan a code if you've already logged in on your mobile for protect. So log in on your mobile with protect, and then as you can see, all your cameras are available to you. In fact, just to put this in context, I'm actually recording this in Australia, but in the UK, but the cameras are actually in the UK. So it's actually because I've got a VPN set up, I'm actually pulling that over from here. Now let's just repeat that process. We can do that again with Unifi Access. And as you can see, I can go through now that Access is on there using the same process. Just that little button in the top right-hand corner of your profile allows you to scan the barcode to be able to auto log the phone in. And then obviously now you can see once that phone is logged in, I can let me choose the portico there, and actually I can talk back onto it, and I can unlock it. So let me unlock it. There you go. See, I've sent the unlock, and now I can also use the option to talk and send a message through it. So now my phone actually has some of those extra features on it that are actually pretty cool. On the bigger screen ones, you have a little bit more functionality in how things are laid out. This is a slightly more cut down version in the smaller screen that we've got. Obviously up the top here, we do have a camera as well with a slider across the top to actually hide that away if you don't want to have that pointing at you all of the time. So hopefully that's given you a starting point really on how to configure Unifi Talk using third-party SIP providers and some of those key bits that you need to actually make it work. Hopefully that's been useful. Head on over to our YouTube channel. We've got plenty more box openings, network, firewall, wireless and camera security, plenty of how-to guides, performance guides, things like this. What do I need to run Unifi Network or Unifi Protect? So please do dig in over there, subscribe and stay up to date.